In this section, we'll look at Reagan's second term, specifically some of the developments in the Middle East and how the Central American situation with the Contras devolved into the Iran-Contra scandal, rather. During Reagan's second term, the Iraq-Iran war, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, that continued. And believing fundamentalist Iran the greater threat after the Iranian hostage crisis, Reagan offered covert aid to Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. Hussein would later anger the U.S. and be toppled by an American invasion during the presidency of George W. Bush. The Middle East continued to be a real problem, and in 1985, Islamic terrorists hijacked a TWA flight over Greece and flew it to Algiers. When they learned that an American Navyman was on board, they killed him. In 1986, terrorists associated with the Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi bombed a Berlin discotheque. In retaliation, Reagan launched an air raid on Libya in an attempt to kill Gaddafi. The bombing killed Gaddafi's son, but not the leader himself. 2 years later, just before Reagan left office, Libyan agents blew up an airliner over Scotland, Pan Am Flight 103. Eventually, American pressure helped end Gaddafi's terrorism. In 1987, Islamic terrorists hijacked a cruise liner, the Al-Kililaro, which was in the Mediterranean. And when they found a disabled American, they shot him and dumped his body overboard. You can see the tombstone of Leon Klinghoffer here on the right. As a result of the continuing turmoil in Lebanon, Shiite terrorists kept taking Western hostages, including several Americans. Notable hostages were the reporter Terry Anderson and the Anglican bishop Terry Waite, who was actually on a peace mission there. Reagan vowed never to negotiate with terrorists, believing that to do so encouraged further terrorism. Reagan's national security advisor, Robert McFarlane, however, convinced Reagan that if the United States covertly opened a dialogue with Shiite Muslim Iran, the Iranians might use their leverage to win the hostages' release. With no American connections to Iran since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, however, McFarlane turned to an arms dealer, Mansour Gorbachev, who had Iranian connections. Reagan then approved the sale of anti-tank missiles to Iran. The plan called for the Israelis to act as mediators. Israel would ship the arms to Iran, and the U.S. would then replenish the Israelis. Unfortunately, all the efforts resulted in was the release of only one hostage, Benjamin Ware, in 1985. Despite this lack of success, McFarlane's successor as National Security Advisor, John Poindexter, kept pursuing the sales with Reagan's support, this time without Israeli assistance, but with his own delivery connections. Poindexter, together with his aide, Colonel Oliver North, used former military officer Richard Secord and his associate Albert Hakim as independent businessmen to make the sales. Despite the fact that the new arms sales again resulted in the release of only one new American, but I should note also 3 additional hostages taken, Poindexter and North continued their covert efforts. Increasingly, Colonel North operated independently. As all this was going on in the Middle East, Reagan moved again regarding the Nicaraguan Contras. Congress had blocked aid to the Contras with the Bolin Amendment, but Reagan ordered his advisors to find private sources of aid. Reagan believed that the Bolin Amendment was a violation of the president's constitutional powers to conduct foreign policy. In time, Saudi Arabia and Brunei provided millions of dollars in secret aid. Throughout 1985, these 2 covert operations, one operating in the Middle East and one in Central America, both under the auspices of the National Security Agency, operated independently of one another. Sometime in early 1986, however, all of this changed. Poindexter, North, and their aides, likely operating with the knowledge of CIA Director William Casey, decided to divert the money they got from the Iranians to the Contras. By overcharging the Iranians, they would have money for the Contras. When this became public in 1986, it was known as the Iran-Contra scandal. When, first, the news of the arms sales hit, Reagan denied that he'd sold arms to Iran in exchange for the hostage release, but later he was forced to admit that he had. As Reagan learned of the diversion of funds, he ordered Attorney General Edwin Meese to investigate. but Meese delayed actions and didn't move to protect or seal the important documents. Poindexter North, meanwhile, shredded much of the records as North's attractive assistant, Fawn Hall, famously smuggled out documents in her socks and underwear. When all this became public, it just added sensationalism to the whole scandal. When the diversion of funds became finally public in late November 1986, it really shocked the nation. Reagan ordered the creation of a special review board to investigate, led by former Texas Senator John Tower, which became known as, of course, as the Tower Commission. Reagan also sought a court-appointed special prosecutor to take over Meese's earlier investigation. In December, Judge Lawrence Walsh was appointed as special prosecutor. Congress began hearings and granted limited immunity to key participants, such as Poindexter North. North unapologetically testified of his desire to fight communists in Central America, and he looked good in his uniform in front of those Weasley politicians, the public thought, and much of the public, certainly the conservative Republicans, applauded his efforts. As it turned out, the congressional immunity that Congress had granted North later hurt Walsh's efforts to prosecute the participants fully. The Tower Commission ended up exonerating Reagan, concluding that he didn't know of the diversion, but also suggested that he'd exercised poor control over his national security apparatus. Reagan publicly accepted the Tower Commission's reports. When Walsh concluded his investigations by 1992, he'd obtained convictions of Poindexter, North, and Secor, among a number of other figures. Because of North's congressional immunity, however, his conviction was thrown out. Upon taking office in 1989, Reagan's successor, his vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush president, announced pardons for 6 people, including McFarlane and former Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, who'd also been implicated. The Iran-Contra scandal sort of, ended even more controversy. The Iran-Contra scandal dominated much of the news during Reagan's second term and sort of weakened his position politically, as you can see in this cartoon. In any event, this concludes the section on Reagan's second term in the Middle East and their Iran-Contra.